Greetings, fellow alchemists, and welcome to Wordplay Wizardry. Today, we've got another deep dive on our hands. That's right, we're drilling beneath the surface to the iceberg below. With what topic? The next two genres. Now, for a lot of these deep dives, it will be individual genres. And there's a good chance that I split fantasy into two deep dives. High and low fantasy. But some genres are pretty surface. There's not a lot to them, which means we don't have a lot of information to cover. A good example would be something like horror. Not a particularly difficult explanation there, which means all of the darker genres, mystery, thriller, suspense, horror, will likely all be in a video together. And today's deep dive is no exception. Perhaps you've seen this symbol before. Usually you'll see these two masks in and around a theater. Back in ancient Greece, actors would often wear masks to better represent the character or the emotion that their character was experiencing or representing. That way, even the cheap seats in the back could understand. These two masks represent Melpomene and Thalia, and Melpomene is sometimes known as Malpo. They are the masks of comedy and tragedy. Now, tragedy isn't a modern genre, but drama is, and those are the two we'll be covering, comedy and drama. The reason for the dual coverage is comedy is a rather straightforward genre, but considering the history with Malpo and Thalia, pairing them together just made sense. After all, much like the masks, the two genres are mirror images of each other, but we'll get to that. The biggest thing when writing comedy is timing. In terms of pace, it is the faster of the two. It's not the blistering pace you might expect with an action story, but it still moves pretty fast. Why? Comedy is largely driven by dialogue, especially in a literature format. And in literature, dialogue has a naturally faster pace. By the same token, there is physical comedy, but it doesn't pack the same punch. Physical comedy is better suited to a visual medium. However, because it's physical, it's also action. And what did we learn? Action naturally has a faster pace. But as I said, the real issue with comedy is timing. So what's the difference between timing and pace? Well, as we said previously, pace is how fast or slow a story unfolds. Essentially, how fast or slow a story reads. Timing is all about delivery, having funny moments land at just the right time. Your goal is maximum result for input. What will generate the biggest or best response from your reader? But for a good example of this biggest and best result, let's look at the reverse. And that is fear. A jump scare packs a big punch. It gets a fear response very quickly, but at the same time, it leaves the audience vulnerable for what happens next. And usually, what follows is even more frightening. It might be a different type of frightening, but still scary nonetheless. Comedy functions similarly. There's a lead up and a payoff, just like with horror. Whereas horror has a jump scare to leave the audience or reader vulnerable, comedy makes use of small jokes, leaving them open for the big punch after. The mood is lightened, come in, make everyone laugh. Those small jokes keep the pace moving and make sure everyone is ready for the big payoff. A good example would be a cyclical joke. This is something you often see in sitcoms. Someone makes a comment and it gets a laugh. Then, sometime later, another character will turn that same phrase around on the original speaker and get an even bigger laugh. The comedy comes full circle. It was funny the first time, but even funnier the second. With comedy, you want a lighthearted tone and or mood with a decent drumbeat of comedic lines, and then pepper in the larger funny beats. If you would like examples of how this sounds, I would suggest situational comedies or sitcoms. Find one you like and watch a few episodes. However, avoid the sitcoms where the humor is largely physical. You want words. Now at this point, I should leave a word of caution. Ad-libbing and delivery style won't help a novel. This means vocal jokes. What you're after is the line itself, not in how it's said. Just in the same way that physical jokes in a novel don't ring as strongly as dialogue. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that comedy isn't the original genre. That would be melodrama, which means something that is sensational, exaggerated, or slightly less realistic. And there's usually a happy ending, which isn't always the case in real life. But happy endings are, by definition, happy. And you want to feel good when it comes to reading or watching comedy. The same, however, cannot be said for the other genre. Dramas are much more realistic than comedies or melodramas, and as such, don't always get a happy ending. Dramas more often reflect life as it is and not how we want it to be. In terms of pace, dramas are also slower than comedies. They heavily feature dialogue, yes, and dialogue is faster than narration, but the story pace itself is generally slower. Things take time to unfold, and a big factor to this is creating a deep, emotional connection. That takes time to develop. No one opens a book and immediately identifies with the main character on page 1. Unless page 1 is nothing but ways in which the main character is like that particular reader, it doesn't happen. We as humans build into liking people. Sometimes we like people right away, but more often than not, it takes time. You've got to warm up to each other. You've got to understand each other. You've got to learn about each other. And sometimes we need to not like them at first. Seems strange, but it's true. In literature, a misunderstood character who's finally understood earns a much deeper connection with the reader, which brings us to drama's biggest point. With comedy, it's humor and timing, but with drama, it's emotion, deep emotional investment. This is why dramas are longer and slower. Dramas are all about the human condition, what we think, what we feel, how we react. But this is also what ties drama and melodrama together. Both of them examine humanity. Both of them feature ordinary people. Both of them relatable, which is why we cheer for the good guy, cry at the heartache, and laugh when appropriate. With dramas, we get angry when the world is unjust, and with comedies, when the good guy doesn't finish first. Being able to tap into emotion is essential. It's what gives your story life. So give it the realism it so desperately needs. With other genres, we come for the people, but stay for the journey. With drama and melodrama, we come for the journey and stay for the people. Take action. A war story. I don't need emotional connection when bombs are exploding and bullets are flying. I just need a personal one. One character to be the focus. What doesn't connect in that case is a grand scope. Seeing the battle from high above. Ants marching us to war. We watch that. We read that and drink it in. But we aren't connected. It isn't until the story pulls into one particular soldier that we now feel like we're a part of that fight. We need to be down in the trenches in a war story. But here's the thing. We already know the character's emotional state. Maybe we haven't actually been in war, but we have a pretty good idea what it would be like. A constant struggle between flight and fight, played out in reality, not just in that character's mind, but in their body and soul. Simple. All you have to do is get that connection, and you're off to the races. Drama and melodrama are anything but simple. Because there's far less physical action, these two genres have a different type of conflict. Internal. The lines in action, fantasy, and sci-fi, horror, they're always clear. Well, not always. But generally speaking, everything is black and white. Heroes are good. The villains are bad. Black and white. With drama and melodrama. Everything is gray. The bad guys aren't necessarily that bad. And the good guys aren't always the best. People you wouldn't think have redeeming qualities. And people you expect more of have a lot of flaws. Everything is gray. Conflict is emotional, internal. The only physical struggle is usually if there's a contest of some kind. But internal struggle is about how we react, what we think, and what we feel, what we're willing to accept. Sometimes ethics and morals get involved, but it's always a struggle within the mind, one we get to see play out thanks to how the story is told, namely being written and not visual. Visual mediums miss that internal struggle. Now, what do you think my next piece of advice is going to be? If you said research, you've been paying attention. It's especially necessary if you plan to go historical. Of course, comedy needs a lot less research than drama does. In fact, comedy might require the least amount of research of any genre. Now, because I've separated historical into its own genre, we will discuss that research in that episode. But just know, historical stories need to be accurate, extremely so. And this takes a lot of research. So if you want to write drama, be prepared to spend a longer time in prep doing research. Now let's do a little comparison. Compile all we've talked about with these two genres. Comedy is simple, relatively speaking. However, the storylines are fairly straightforward. The main character is ordinary and put in an extraordinary situation. Hilarity always ensues. There is a struggle, something to overcome, and in the end, that ordinary person becomes better. There's warmth and good feelings. A happy ending, because everyone is usually much better off at the end than they were at the beginning. When I was doing research for this video, one of the best examples of a well-written comedy is Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That book is perhaps top 3 best examples of comedy literature. And it does this because it's satire. Satire of standard science fiction. Now, not all satire is funny. Animal Farm is satire, an exaggerated retelling of the Russian Revolution. And that story is certainly not comedy. Yet, satire and humor make excellent bedfellows. Both rely on exaggerations. What all this boils down to is the heart of writing comedy is simple. Tell a story and use humor to do so. What's not simple are the constraints of literature itself. Without visuals, you must rely on words alone. The problem with that is comedy is all about timing. Compounding this is the fact that people read at different speeds. So, for a comedy novel to work, it must be funny regardless of how fast someone reads the words. The jokes have to have perfect timing and not rely on pace. While doing research for this, I stumbled across a discussion about the low number of comedy novels, and one person disagreed with the premise of the conversation itself, that there were a lot of comedy books out there. Here's what I'll say. There is a lot of books with humor. I grant this. But true comedy? That's different. For proof, go to a physical bookstore. They range everything by genre or topic, along with a section of age range. Is there a comedy section? If so, how many shelves? And if there is a section, how many books are novels? Or are they a collection of short stories? For reference, the bookseller in my area doesn't even have comedy listed as a genre on its website. And that's a national chain. So comedies are simple, but they're also complex. Dramas are almost always complex. Dramas rely less on external conflict and more on internal conflict. Dramas are big on emotion and emotional connection. They deal with the human condition, and that alone is complex. Dramas are longer and have a slower pace. Conversely, comedy can be shorter and have a faster pace. Both deal with a lot of dialogue, but it's all about how it's used. In a drama, the dialogue may feel slower, more lines delivered at once. If it's quick back and forth, say you'd find within a comedy, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, it moves fast. Since we mentioned it before, let me bring up this point. A lot of the humor in Hitchhiker's Guide comes from the sarcastic narration. This voice picks up where the visuals would normally be. It relies more on tone to create that humorous atmosphere. Now, you may be asking at this point, why don't I point out any good drama examples? Pretty much anything by Jane Austen. Little Women, Fault in Our Stars, Looking for Alaska, and Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. If you plan on writing drama, these books would be the place to start. And yes, Jane Austen and Louisa May Alcott's books are, at this point, historical. But they're also pretty much pinnacle examples of the genre, synonymous at this point. As for other examples of comedy, you could try Terry Pratchett, or The Princess Bride, or Confederacy of Dunces. Now, full disclosure, I did not get an emotional connection when I read Fault in Our Stars, but a lot of people do. But let me explain. Fault in Our Stars is first person, and the main character is dying of cancer. If you remember back to my perspective video, this means that the main character is not in danger. And unfortunately, that is part of the drama. She could die at any time. But if you can get past that aspect, it's a good book. The human connection aspect, the feelings, the emotions, they are good. But I personally didn't have that same emotional connection you want with the main character. All you have to do to enjoy it is ignore my rule about first person. And considering Fault in Our Stars is John Green's most popular book, a lot of people have done that. How you proceed is up to you. There's a lot of good examples out there to follow. Just remember, your voice as narrator will matter. In both genres, the narrator controls the timing and the pace. These two things are both critical in these genres. You will be setting the tone, be it funny or serious. And you are responsible for the emotional connection. Again, important for both genres. Comedy and drama are all heartfelt, heartwarming, heartache. We read and experience them with our emotions, with our hearts. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, fellow alchemists, take care.